The white pine cross stood 7 feet tall in Eliza Freeman's dooryard, planted sometime between midnight and dawn on September 14, 1867. Someone had carved 13 notches into the vertical beam, one for each year her husband Solomon had lived as a free man before they killed him. The horizontal arms bore no markings, just splinters where the axe had bitten deep. Eliza found it when she stepped out to check the chickens, saw the raw wood pale against the red Georgia clay, and understood immediately that the men who put it there believed she would run. They had no idea she'd been counting them for months, logging their names in a code only 3 people in the state could read, waiting for exactly this kind of mistake. The cross wasn't a warning, it was a roster. Every man who touched that pine had left something behind. A thread, a boot print, a pattern of axe strokes she recognized from timber they'd stolen from the freedmen's school. By the time the sun cleared the pines that morning, Eliza had already decided which of them would die first. The Freeman farm sat 3 miles south of Dawson in Terrell County, Georgia, where the red clay gave way to sandy loam and the Flint River curved like a scar through land that remembered everything. 40 acres Solomon Freeman had purchased in 1866 with union discharge pay and money Eliza never explained. The cabin was pine plank with a stone chimney, a root cellar Solomon had dug himself, and a porch that caught the evening breeze. Neighbors, the 7 other black families farming within walking distance, considered Eliza quiet, competent, perhaps a little strange. She sang while she worked, old hymns mostly, but sometimes melodies no one recognized. Her garden grew better than it should have in that soil. She kept to herself, but never seemed afraid, even after Solomon's death, even when white riders passed on the road and stared too long at a woman alone. What they didn't know: Eliza Freeman had been born Eliza Morse in 1838 on a tobacco plantation in Virginia, had learned to read from a master's daughter who thought teaching scripture was charity, and had spent the war years moving through Confederate territory with a carpetbag and a cover story that changed with every county. Union intelligence officers knew her as Mockingbird, a courier and observer whose coded reports had identified supply depots, troop movements, and sympathizer networks across 3 states. She'd memorized maps, counted wagons, listened at windows where Confederate officers drank and boasted. Her hymns carried messages in their tempo and key changes. The quilts she sold at market used patterns that told Union scouts which roads were watched, which bridges were mined, which planters were hoarding grain the Army needed. She'd met Solomon in 1865 in Macon, where he was mustering out of the 33rd United States Colored Infantry, and she was closing her last intelligence circuit. He'd been a sergeant, literate, careful, and when she told him enough of the truth to matter, he'd asked just one question: "Are we done with that life?" She'd said yes. They'd bought the land, built the cabin, planted cotton and corn. For 2 years, they'd been farmers, nothing more. Solomon had joined the Union League, had helped organize the Freedmen's School in Dawson, had registered to vote in the spring of 1867 despite the threats. That was what killed him. They came for Solomon on June 9th. 8 men, faces covered, dragged him from the porch while Eliza watched from the doorway with a shotgun she knew better than to fire. They tied him to a fence post in the yard and took turns with a whip, counting to 39, the biblical limit, they said, showing mercy. Solomon died 3 days later, infection spreading faster than Eliza's herbs could fight it. She buried him on the property, marked the grave with a limestone slab, and went back to farming. The neighbors thought it was numbness or faith. The Union League men thought it was fear. No one guessed she was making lists. The Dawson Freedmen's School opened in April 1867 in a former tobacco barn the Union League had purchased for $30. Two teachers, both black women from Savannah, taught 60 students ranging from 6 years old to 60. Classes ran morning and afternoon, primers and slates donated by the Freedmen's Bureau. Older students helping younger ones sound out words, while white townspeople muttered about uppity notions and northern meddling. The school had been standing for 5 months when someone burned it down on September 7, 1867, a Saturday night when the building was empty except for one girl. Her name was Clara, 10 years old, an orphan the teachers had taken in after her mother died of fever. She'd been sleeping in a back room where they stored supplies. The fire started near the front door. Coal oil splashed across the threshold and up the walls, lit by someone who didn't check if the building was occupied. Clara woke to smoke and heat, made it as far as the side window before the roof collapsed. They found her body the next morning, curled beneath the window frame, one hand still reaching toward air she never reached. Eliza heard about it at church on Sunday. She'd taken in a neighbor's children for the service while their mother recovered from childbirth, and the kids came back from their Sunday school class, whispering about the fire, about Clara, about how the sheriff said it was probably an accident, a lantern left burning. Eliza walked into Dawson that afternoon, stood outside the burned shell while ash drifted in the September heat, and saw what the sheriff had chosen not to see. The coal oil splash pattern on the threshold, the way the fire had started in 3 places, the boot prints in the ash that showed at least 4 men had stood and watched it burn. She knew Clara. The old girl had come to the Freeman farm twice with the teachers, helping to deliver donated food. Clara had a gap-toothed smile and a memory like a steel trap. She'd memorized the alphabet in 2 weeks, was already reading at a 3rd grade level. Eliza had given her a biscuit and a penny both times. Now Clara was dead because someone decided learning was a threat. That night, Eliza pulled a tin box from beneath a floorboard in the root cellar. Inside, a code book wrapped in oilcloth, 3 folded maps of Terrell and surrounding counties, a list of names with notations in cipher, and 2 letters bearing Union intelligence seals. She hadn't opened the box since Solomon died. She spread the maps on the cellar floor, lit a candle, and began updating information that was 15 months old. The war was over, but the networks were still there. Men who'd hidden Union scouts, women who'd carried messages, preachers and blacksmiths and laundresses who knew how to watch and remember. Some had scattered, some had died, some were still exactly where she'd left them, waiting for someone to say the work wasn't finished. The cross appeared 4 days after Eliza started making inquiries. She'd visited 6 farms in 3 days, sat on porches drinking well water, asking careful questions about who'd been seen near the school, who'd been talking loudest about northern agitators, who had access to coal oil and matches. She'd sung hymns with 2 families, the old songs with the old meanings, and seen recognition flicker in the eyes of people who remembered what those rhythms meant during the war. One man, a blacksmith named Isaac who'd hidden Federal scouts in his forge, had given her 3 names. Another woman, a laundress who'd once counted Confederate wagons for Eliza, had given her 2 more and added, "You be careful, Eliza Freeman. Some of these men got long memories." The cross told her the memories weren't long enough. If they'd remembered who she really was, they wouldn't have left a marker. They would have burned the cabin with her in it. Instead, they'd made a threat meant to terrify a widow into flight or silence. That was useful. Fear made people confident. Confidence made them sloppy. Eliza studied the cross in the gray September dawn. 7 feet of fresh-cut pine, still weeping sap. The 13 notches carved with something narrow, a pocket knife probably, each stroke deliberate enough to show intent. They'd wanted her to count them, to understand the message was personal. What they hadn't considered, Eliza had seen axe work from every timber crew in 3 counties. She recognized the angle of these cuts, the way the blade had bitten slightly left on the downstroke. 2 men in Dawson swung an axe that way. One was 70 years old with palsy. The other was a 30-year-old farmer named Virgil Hatcher, who'd been heard saying the school got what it deserved. The boot prints around the cross told her more. 4 distinct sets, all men's sizes, all pressed deep, enough to suggest weight or haste. One set showed a worn heel on the left boot. She'd seen that print before, in the ash outside the school. The thread caught on a splinter at shoulder height was cotton homespun, dyed with butternut, the color the local Klan chapter had adopted, because white robes were too expensive and too visible. She collected the thread, measured the prints, noted the position of the cross relative to her door, directly in line, meant to be seen first thing, and went inside to make breakfast. While grits boiled, she pulled out a slate and began drawing a map from memory. The Freeman farm at the center, the 7 black families in a loose ring around her, the white farms and Dawson itself radiating outward. She marked the school site with a cross, then began adding names to locations. Virgil Hatcher's place, 2 miles northwest. The Klan's known meeting spot, a hunting cabin on the Mosley Plantation, 4 miles north. The homes of men who'd been at Solomon's whipping. She knew 3 for certain, suspected 4 more. The sheriff's office, the magistrate's house, the cotton gin where white and black men worked in uneasy proximity. 13 notches. She wondered if they'd assigned 1 man per notch, a work detail dividing the carving among themselves. Or perhaps 13 represented something else, the number of black families they planned to drive out, the number of Union League members they'd targeted. Either way, the cross was a declaration. The Klan was moving from burnings and night rides to something more organized, more ambitious. That meant they'd be gathering soon, planning the next action, coordinating in ways that required meetings and messages. That meant Eliza could watch them gather, could intercept them planning, could turn their own organization into the trap that caught them. The grits burned while she worked. She didn't notice until smoke filled the kitchen. She scraped the pot clean, started over, and ate standing at the window, looking at the cross while the September sun climbed higher and the heat built toward another scorching afternoon. By the time she finished eating, she'd made 3 decisions. First, she would not run. Second, she would rebuild her intelligence network using every contact she'd cultivated during the war. Third, before the year ended, every man who'd touched that cross would be dead, and the Terrell County Klan would understand that some widows were more dangerous than any regiment. The work started that day. The Flint River swamp stretched for miles south of Dawson, a maze of cypress and tupelo, where water reflected sky and solid ground shifted with the seasons. During the war, it had been a highway for runaway slaves heading to Union lines, a hiding place for Federal scouts, a graveyard for Confederate deserters who chose the wrong path. Now, in September 1867, it was Eliza's recruiting ground. She started with Isaac the blacksmith. His forge sat on the edge of Dawson, close enough to town for business, far enough out for privacy. She arrived at dusk, carrying a broken hoe blade that didn't need fixing. Isaac was a broad man, 40 years old, with burn scars on his forearms and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at the hoe, looked at Eliza, and set down his hammer. "That blade ain't broke," he said. "No," Eliza agreed. "But we need to talk about the men who are." They walked to the back of the property, where an old shed leaned against a live oak. Inside, Isaac kept a cot, a water barrel, and a loose floorboard that concealed a space large enough for a man to lie flat. "Had 3 federal scouts use this during the war," he said. "You sent 2 of them to me, spring of '64. Coded message and a hymn about Lazarus rising. I remember." "I need that network again," Eliza said. "Not for hiding, for watching." Isaac listened while she explained. The Klan was organizing, consolidating power, moving beyond individual terror to systematic control. They'd burned the school to prove they could act with impunity. They'd killed Clara to show that mercy didn't apply. They'd marked Eliza's farm because they thought a widow alone was the perfect symbol of vulnerability. What they didn't understand was that vulnerability could be a disguise, that a woman everyone underestimated could move through their world invisible, gathering intelligence they'd never suspect she possessed. "You asking me to spy on white folks in peacetime," Isaac said. "War's over. We ain't soldiers anymore." "War's not over," Eliza said. "It just changed uniforms." Isaac was quiet for a long minute, the forge fire crackling in the background. Finally, "What do you need?" "Eyes and ears. You hear things at the forge. Men waiting for horses to be shod, talking while you work. I need to know who meets where, who's recruiting, who's in charge. I need names and routines. I need to know when they plan the next raid." "And then what?" "Then we stop them." "How?" Eliza met his eyes. "The same way we stopped Confederates. We make them believe they're walking into an easy target, and we kill them when they arrive." The forge fire popped. Isaac rubbed his jaw, considering. "You talking about murder?" "I'm talking about war," Eliza said. "They killed my husband. They killed Clara. They'll keep killing until someone stops them. Law won't do it. Sheriff's probably under the hood himself. Federal troops are pulling out, going home. Friedman's bureau can't protect us, so we protect ourselves." "Who's we?" "You, if you're willing. Others I'm recruiting. People who remember how this worked during the war." Isaac looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once. "I'll watch. I'll listen. But I got a wife and 2 children, Eliza. I won't risk them." "You won't have to," Eliza said. "You pass information. I do the rest." She left the forge with a list of names Isaac gave her. Men who'd been talking too loud at the general store. Men who'd asked pointed questions about which black families were armed. Men who donated money to community defense funds everyone understood meant Klan operations. 3 of the names were already on her list. 2 were new. She added them to the map she was building, the web of connections and locations that would show her where the Klan was vulnerable. Martha Davies ran a laundry business from her cabin on the Mosley plantation, where she'd lived as a slave and stayed on as a freedwoman because Mosley paid wages and the work was steady. She was 53 years old, bent from decades of hauling water and lifting wet linen, but her mind was sharp as new-forged steel. During the war, she'd counted uniforms and ranked insignia, had noted which officers sent their clothes together, indicating shared quarters and coordinated movements, and had passed that information to Eliza in bundles of clean laundry that also contained folded notes hidden in pockets. Eliza found her on a Wednesday morning, bent over a steaming wash tub, lye soap stinging the air. "Martha Davies," Eliza called. "You still taking in work?" Martha looked up, water dripping from her hands. She studied Eliza's face, and something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. Depends on what needs washing, she said. They talked while Martha worked, Eliza standing close enough that their conversation wouldn't carry. Martha's position on the Mosley place gave her access to the hunting cabin where the clan met. She cleaned it twice a month, part of her arrangement with Mosley, who claimed the cabin was for his personal use, but everyone knew better. She'd seen robes hanging on pegs, had smelled coal oil and burnt cloth, had found a ledger once with names listed in 2 columns, members and targets. They meet Thursday nights, Martha said, scrubbing a shirt against the washboard. Usually 10 to 15 men. They come in separately, no robes till they're inside. Most arrive between 8 and 9. They leave around midnight, sometimes later if they're planning something. Next meeting? Eliza asked. Tomorrow night. And I heard Mosley telling his son they're expecting a good turnout. Something about finishing what they started with the school. Eliza felt ice slide through her chest. They're planning another raid. That's my guess, Martha said. She pulled the shirt from the water, wrung it out, and added quietly, "There's a girl who helps me sometimes, Mosley's housemaid. She hears things too. Careful girl, smart. She could be useful if you need someone inside." "I need everyone who's willing," Eliza said. Martha nodded. "Then you'll have her. Name's Ruth. I'll talk to her today." Eliza left with 2 more names. Ruth, the housemaid, and a stable hand named Benjamin, who'd been court-martialed during the war for refusing to whip a fellow soldier, but had served out his term and returned to Tyrrell County bitter and ready for any chance to strike back. The network was forming faster than she'd hoped. People remembered. People were tired of being afraid. The 2 teachers from Savannah had fled after the fire, terrified and grief-stricken. But one of them had a sister in Dawson, a seamstress named Anna who worked from a room above the general store. Eliza found her hemming a dress, fingers flying with the quick efficiency of someone who needed every penny. Anna was 28, light-skinned enough to pass in some contexts, and angry in a way that hummed beneath her careful politeness. "My sister's gone," Anna said without preamble. "Went back to Savannah. Says she'll never teach in Georgia again." "I'm sorry," Eliza said. "Sorry doesn't bury Clara." Anna set down the dress. "Why are you here, Mrs. Freeman?" "Because I'm going to do something about the men who killed her, and I need information. You see everyone who comes through that general store. You hear conversations. I need to know who's celebrating that fire, who's making jokes, who's spending money they didn't have before." Anna's eyes narrowed. "What are you planning?" "Justice," Eliza said simply. "The law kind or the other kind? The kind that actually happens." Anna thought for a moment, then pulled a scrap of paper from her sewing basket. She'd already written down 3 names. These men came in the day after the fire, bought whiskey, got loud, talked about teaching lessons and keeping order. One of them, Tobias Raines, said Clara was collateral damage like it was funny. I wanted to stab him with my shears. Eliza took the paper. Tobias Raines. She knew that name. He'd been at Solomon's whipping, the youngest of the group, barely 20, eager to prove himself. Did they say anything about what's next? Raines mentioned a big night coming up, said some folks were going to learn who runs this county. Anna hesitated. "Mrs. Freeman, if you're planning what I think you're planning, you need to know these men are organized. It's not just a few hotheads. There's money behind them, structure. Someone's coordinating it all." "Who?" "I don't know. But Mosley's involved. He's at the general store twice a week buying supplies in bulk. Sugar, flour, things a bachelor planter shouldn't need. My guess is he's provisioning their meetings. Anna folded the dress, her hands suddenly shaking. They killed a child. She was 10 years old and they burned her alive. I know, Eliza said. So what are you going to do? Watch them. Wait for them to gather. Then make sure they never gather again. Anna nodded slowly. You need help? I need information. Keep listening, keep watching. If you hear anything about where or when, get word to me. Isaac at the forge knows how to reach me. And if they come for you first? Anna asked. Eliza thought of the cross in her dooryard, the 13 notches. Then they'll learn I'm not as helpless as they think. The question haunted the black community of Terrell County in the days after Clara's death. What could we have done? The school teachers had asked the sheriff to investigate threats against the school. He'd taken notes, promised vigilance, done nothing. The Union League had written to the Freedmen's Bureau requesting protection. The response came 3 weeks later. Resources were limited, no agents available. Perhaps consider relocating the school to a more secure building. The families of students had offered to take turns guarding the building at night. But the teachers worried that armed black men near the school would be seen as provocation, would justify violence rather than prevent it. So they'd done nothing. They'd hoped. They'd prayed. They'd told themselves the threats were just talk, that white people's anger would cool, that the law would function, that Clara would be safe because surely no one would harm a child. And Clara burned. At the Sunday service, 3 days after the cross appeared in Eliza's dooryard, Reverend Sims preached about patience and faith, about turning the other cheek, about waiting for God's justice. He was 60 years old, gray-haired, had been a slave preacher before the war and a free preacher after, and he believed with his whole heart that violence begat violence, that revenge was the Lord's alone. Most of the congregation nodded along, exhausted and afraid, wanting to believe that patience was wisdom rather than paralysis. Eliza sat in the back pew, listening. When the service ended and people filed out into the September heat, she watched families cluster in the churchyard, talking in low voices about whether to stay or flee, whether to send their children to the next school that opened or keep them home, whether the cross at the Freeman place meant the Klan was coming for everyone or just Eliza. Fear had them calculating odds, weighing risks, trying to be reasonable about unreasonable men. A woman named Hannah approached Eliza near the cemetery gate. She was 35, mother of 4, and her oldest son had been friends with Clara. Mrs. Freeman, she said quietly, folks are saying you're planning something dangerous. Folks talk, Eliza said. My husband says we should leave. Go north, maybe Tennessee. He's scared they'll come for us next. Running won't stop them, Eliza said. Neither will staying. Hannah looked back at the church, at the families gathered there. What would you do, Mrs. Freeman, if you had children to think about? Would you stay and fight, or would you run and live? The question landed like a stone in deep water. Eliza thought about Solomon, about the choice he'd made to stay and organize and register to vote even when the threats came. She thought about Clara, whose only crime was learning to read. She thought about the choice the community faced now: accept terror as the price of living here, or resist and risk everything. I don't have children to think about, Eliza said carefully, so I can't tell you what I'd do if I did. But I can tell you this: every family that runs leaves the ones who stay more vulnerable. The Klan wants us scattered, isolated, easy to control. They want us making choices like the one you're making. Stay and risk death, or flee and lose everything you've built. That's how they win without fighting. So you're saying we should stay? I'm saying there's a third choice, Eliza said. We stay. We organize. We prepare. And when they come, because they will come, we make them understand that terrorizing freed people costs more than they're willing to pay. Hannah stared at her. You're talking about killing white men. I'm talking about defending ourselves. The law watched my husband die and called it a legal whipping. The law let Clara burn and called it an accident. The law works for them, Hannah, not us. So we use what works for us. Hannah was quiet for a long time. Then, if you're organizing something, my husband knows how to shoot. He was a sharpshooter in the 54th Massachusetts. He doesn't talk about it, but I know he still has his rifle hidden. Tell him to keep it clean, Eliza said. Word spread. By the end of the week, 5 more men had approached Isaac at the forge, asking careful questions about the widow Freeman and whether she needed help with anything. 2 women who'd been couriers during the war sent messages through Martha's laundry deliveries. We remember the work. We'll do it again. A teenage boy who'd been Clara's student came to Eliza's farm and said simply, I want to help. She was teaching me to read. The network wasn't an army. It was farmers and blacksmiths and laundresses and a teenage boy who missed his teacher. But it was growing, person by person, fueled not by ideology but by exhaustion, by the simple recognition that patience had bought them nothing but more graves. They were deciding, quietly, individually, but deciding nonetheless, that turning the other cheek only worked if the other side eventually stopped hitting. Martha's intelligence about the Thursday night meeting proved accurate. 16 men arrived at the Mosley hunting cabin between 8 and 9 p.m. on September 20th, 1867. Eliza watched from a tree line 200 yards away, counting riders, noting horses, memorizing faces illuminated by the lantern lights spilling from the cabin windows. She'd positioned herself downwind so the dogs wouldn't catch her scent, and she'd worn dark clothing that blended with the shadows. Old skills, muscle memory from a war that hadn't ended. She recognized 8 of the 16. Virgil Hatcher, who'd carved the cross. Tobias Raines, who'd laughed about Clara. William Mosley himself, the planter who owned the cabin. 3 men who'd been at Solomon's whipping. 2 she didn't know, but would learn. The gathering lasted until just past midnight, men emerging in groups of 2 or 3 mounting horses, riding off in different directions to avoid the appearance of a coordinated group. After the last rider left, Eliza waited. She counted to 500, watching for stragglers or guards. Nothing moved. The cabin sat dark and silent. She crossed the open ground quickly, tried the door, unlocked Mosley's arrogance, and slipped inside. The cabin was a single room with a table, 6 chairs, a fireplace, and a cabinet where the robes hung. The smell of whiskey and tobacco layered over older scents. Blood, fear, burned cloth. She worked by feel in the darkness, searching for the ledger Martha had mentioned. She found it in the cabinet, beneath a folded white robe, a leather-bound book with pages filled in 3 different hands. She couldn't risk a light, so she carried the ledger to the window where moonlight gave her just enough illumination to read by. The first section listed names in 2 columns, members and prospects. 43 names total, more than she'd estimated. The second section detailed actions, raids, whippings, burnings, with dates and outcomes. The school fire was there, logged as educational deterrent, September 7th, satisfactory result. Clara wasn't mentioned. Solomon's death was on page 12. Freeman enforcement action, June 9th, subject expired June 12th, objective achieved. The final section was what she needed. Plans. The next raid was scheduled for October 5th. Target listed as Freeman Property and Associates. Coordinated action, full participation required. They were planning a large-scale attack, not just on her farm, but on every black household they suspected of Union League activity. They'd drawn a map on the facing page, showing routes of approach, assignments by group, timing designed to hit 6 locations simultaneously. She memorized the map, the names, the dates. Then she noticed something written in margin notes, initialed WM, William Mosley. Escalation necessary to establish permanent control. Federal withdrawal creates opportunity. Recommend expansion to neighboring counties after Terrell example set. They weren't just terrorizing locally. They were building a model they planned to export. A system of violence designed to reverse Reconstruction entirely. The Terrell County Klan was a test case. Eliza put the ledger back exactly where she'd found it. She left the cabin the way she'd entered, crossed back to the tree line, and started the 3-mile walk home. The September night was hot and still, cicadas shrilling, the smell of pine resin thick in the air. She walked and thought and calculated. October 5th, 2 weeks away. 16 confirmed Klan members, possibly more. 6 target locations, which meant 6 groups, probably 2 or 3 men each. They'd be coordinated but separated, relying on speed and surprise. They expected to find frightened families, maybe a few shotguns, no organized resistance. They were wrong. By the time Eliza reached her farm, she'd outlined a plan. It was ruthless and precise and required perfect execution. It would cost lives, some of them, all of theirs, if it failed. But if it worked, the Terrell County Klan would cease to exist. And every Klan chapter in Georgia would understand that some targets fought back. The cross still stood in her dooryard, pale in the moonlight. She walked past it into the cabin, pulled out her maps and lists, and began writing orders in the code she'd used during the war. By dawn, she'd drafted 6 messages to be delivered by 6 different couriers to 6 different groups. The network was about to discover what Mockingbird had been planning while everyone thought she was grieving. Eliza's kitchen table became a war room. She spread her maps across the surface, weighted the corners with stones from the creek, and began translating the Klan's October 5th plan into her own counter-strategy. The logic was simple. If the Klan intended to hit 6 locations simultaneously, those 6 locations would become ambush sites. The raiders expected defenseless targets. They'd find coordinated resistance. The challenge was communication, timing, and ensuring that every person involved understood the risks. The first meeting happened on September 23rd in Isaac's Forge after dark. 10 people. Isaac, Martha, Anna the seamstress, Benjamin the stable hand, Ruth the housemaid, Hannah's husband James, 2 veterans from the 33rd Colored Infantry, the teenage boy named Samuel, and Eliza. They gathered in the back shed, where no light would show, speaking in whispers while Isaac kept watch at the forge entrance. Eliza laid out what she'd learned. October 5th, 6 groups of Klansmen, 2 or 3 men each. They'll hit my place first, then 5 other farms. The Johnsons, the Washingtons, the Terrells, the Prices, and the Davises. They're planning it for after midnight, expecting everyone to be asleep. They want to burn, intimidate, maybe kill anyone who resists. "How do you know this?" one of the veterans asked. "I saw their ledger, copied their map. They're predictable because they think they're untouchable." James spoke up. So what's your plan? We flip it, Eliza said. They think they're hunting us. We let them believe that until they're committed, then we close the trap. Each target location becomes an ambush point. We position armed men at each farm, hidden, waiting. When the Klansmen arrive, we take them. You mean kill them? James said. Yes. Silence. Then Benjamin. Good. It's not good, Eliza said sharply. It's necessary. There's a difference. Killing isn't a solution. It's a last option when every other option has failed. The law won't protect us. Federal troops are gone. The Klan is escalating. We stop them now, or we live under their terror until they've driven every black family out of this county. Or until they've killed us all, Martha added quietly. Anna asked the critical question, what if we miss some of them? What if they regroup and come back worse? We won't miss them, Eliza said, because we're going to make sure they send everyone. I'm going to give the Klan exactly what they want, a target too tempting to ignore. I'm going to let them think I'm running scared, that the cross worked. I'll start asking around about selling the farm, packing like I'm leaving. They'll hear about it, Mosley's housemaid will make sure of it, and they'll move up the raid to catch me before I flee. They'll commit every available man because they want the symbolic victory of driving out Solomon Freeman's widow. That's a hell of a risk, Isaac said. It's the only play, Eliza said. If we pick them off one or two at a time, they'll scatter and come back stronger. We need to break them all at once, so completely that the survivors spend the rest of their lives afraid of what happens when they wear a hood. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They discussed logistics. Who would be positioned where? How to coordinate timing without telegraph or messenger systems. What weapons each person had access to. How to dispose of bodies afterward. The last part was grim necessity. Federal authorities would investigate if 16 white men disappeared simultaneously. But if the bodies were never found, if the evidence suggested the men had simply scattered or fled, the investigation would stall. The swamp, Benjamin said. Gators don't leave much. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged. I'm just saying. They divided responsibilities. James and the 2 veterans would handle military coordination, positioning, fields of fire, fallback plans. Isaac would supply weapons, borrowing what the Forge didn't have from contacts who'd kept their war rifles hidden. Martha and Ruth would feed disinformation to Mosley and through him to the Klan, shaping their expectations. Anna would watch the general store for any changes in supply purchases that might indicate the raid was being moved up. Samuel, the teenage boy, would run messages between groups. He was fast, small, and no one paid attention to a black kid on the roads. Eliza would coordinate everything, pulling together threads the way she'd done during the war. She would also be bait. The Freeman farm had to look vulnerable, had to draw the Klan in. That meant she'd be alone in the cabin when they arrived, visible and seemingly helpless. The ambush would be positioned in the tree line and outbuildings, close enough to intervene, but hidden enough that the Klansmen wouldn't see the trap until it closed. One more thing, Eliza said. No one talks about this outside this room. Not to family, not to friends, not even to people you trust. Loose talk killed federal scouts during the war. It'll kill us now. If anyone asks what you're doing, you're preparing to defend your own family. That's all. They dispersed the way they'd come, in 1s and 2s, leaving intervals between departures. Eliza was the last to leave. Isaac walked her to the edge of his property and said quietly, "You sure about this? Once it starts, there's no calling it back." "I'm sure," Eliza said. Your husband was a good man. He believed in law and order, in voting and organizing peaceful-like. This ain't what he would have wanted. My husband's dead because good men believed in law and order, Eliza said. I won't make that mistake again. The next week, Eliza became an actress. She walked into Dawson twice, visiting the general store and the land office, asking pointed questions about property values and how one might go about selling a farm quickly. She let her voice tremble when she mentioned the cross. Let her hands shake when the store clerk asked if she was all right. She bought supplies for travel, dried beef, hard bread, things that suggested imminent departure, and made sure several white customers overheard her inquiring about wagon rental. Word spread exactly as intended. By September 28th, half the county believed the Freeman widow was preparing to flee, and the other half was betting on when she'd run. Ruth, working as Mosley's housemaid, reported that the planter seemed pleased, even smug. He told his son the cross did its job, Ruth said when she delivered clean laundry to Martha. Said the widow's breaking, just needs one more push. Did he say when? Martha asked. Soon. He mentioned October but didn't give a date. That was good enough. The clan was holding to their schedule, believing their intimidation had worked. Eliza doubled down on the performance. She was seen loading a trunk onto her porch, wrapping belongings in cloth, acting like someone preparing for a hasty departure. She avoided her usual social visits, attending church but leaving immediately after service, speaking to no one. She looked, to anyone watching, like a frightened woman counting the hours until she could escape. Inside the cabin, she was cleaning weapons. Solomon's rifle, the shotgun she'd kept since the war, 2 pistols purchased from a Freedmen's Bureau sale. She had ammunition for all of them, had been hoarding powder and shot for months. She tested each weapon at night when the sound would be dismissed as hunting or varmint control, making sure they fired reliably, that she could reload quickly. She hadn't forgotten how. Muscle memory from target practice in federal camps, from learning to shoot not for sport, but for survival. The men positioning at the other farms were doing the same. James drilled his 2 partners in night movement and ambush tactics. The veterans taught younger men how to wait in stillness, how to control breathing, how to shoot without hesitation when the moment came. Isaac forged spear points from scrap iron, silent weapons for close work if the shooting started too early. They were becoming, quietly and methodically, the thing Sherman's army had been. Disciplined soldiers with clear objectives and nothing left to lose. On October 1st, 4 days before the planned raid, Ruth brought critical intelligence. Mosley had sent word through clan channels. The Freeman action was confirmed for October 5th. Full turnout. Expected, anyone who missed the gathering would be fined or expelled. The pressure to participate was intense. This wasn't optional membership. It was a command performance. That suited Eliza perfectly. The more men they sent, the more men would die. She spent October 2nd and 3rd walking her property, memorizing every tree, every fence line, every depression in the ground that could provide cover. She identified firing positions, calculated sight lines, determined where the Klansmen would most likely approach, and where her people would be waiting. She marked trees with small cuts that only her group would recognize, indicating positions and ranges. The Freeman farm was 40 acres, but only the 5 acres around the cabin mattered. That was where the trap would spring. On October 4th, Eliza gathered her core team one final time. 9 people in Isaac's shed, faces grim in the lamplight. She went through the plan again, step by step, making sure everyone understood their role. When she finished, she asked, Questions? What if they don't come? Anna asked. What if they change their minds? Then we've prepared for nothing, Eliza said. But they'll come. They're too invested in the symbolism of driving me out. They need a victory after the school burning turned into a child's funeral. They need to show they're still in control. What if federal authorities investigate afterward? One of the veterans asked. They will, Eliza said. But investigating and proving are different things. We're not going to leave evidence. No bodies they can find, no witnesses who'll talk, no paper trail. All anyone will know is that 16 men rode out on October 5th and never came back. Speculation isn't conviction. James asked the hardest question. You sure you can live with this? Killing men in cold blood? Eliza thought of Solomon dying slowly, infection burning through him. She thought of Clara, 10 years old, reaching for air she'd never breathe. She thought of the 13 notches carved into pine, each one a year of Solomon's freedom turned into a taunt. Yes, she said, I can live with it. That night she slept in her cabin alone, fully clothed, weapons within arm's reach. The cross still stood in her dooryard, shadow stretching long in the moonlight. Tomorrow night the clan would come, expecting to find a terrified widow and an easy target. They'd find Mockingbird instead, and they'd learn the same lesson Confederate officers had learned during the war. Underestimating quiet women was a fatal mistake. October 5th, 1867, came in with clear skies and dropping temperatures, autumn finally pushing back against Georgia's stubborn heat. Eliza spent the day in obvious preparation for departure, loading a wagon with furniture, walking her property like someone taking a last look, even visiting the cemetery where Solomon lay. Everything visible, everything designed to convince any watcher that she'd broken, that tonight she'd flee under cover of darkness. At dusk, the team moved into position. They came separately, drifting in from different directions over 2 hours. Men and women who'd fought in different battles under different flags, but were united now by a single objective. They carried rifles, pistols, knives, and Isaac's forged spear points. They wore dark clothing, no white that would catch moonlight. They moved into predetermined positions in the tree line, behind the barn, in the root cellar with its angled sight lines toward the cabin. Eliza stayed in the cabin with a single lamp burning in the window, making herself visible. She sat at the table, apparently packing papers, actually loading pistols and running through the plan one more time in her mind. 9 people hidden outside, 7 more at the other 5 target farms. They'd agreed to handle their raids independently, trusting that each group knew their ground and their enemy. The Freeman farm would be the primary strike, the largest force, the symbolically important victory. That's where Eliza needed overwhelming response. 10 p.m. Nothing. Eliza waited, patient as she'd been during the war when intelligence work meant hours of stillness. She'd learned to control fear, to channel it into focus, to use the adrenaline without letting it cloud judgment. Outside, her people waited with the same discipline, rifles trained on approaches, fingers off triggers until the command came. 11 p.m. A dog barked in the distance, went silent. False alarm. 11:30. The sound of horses, multiple riders moving at pace but not gallop. Coming from the north, the direction of the Mosley cabin. Eliza stood, moved the lamp closer to the window, let herself be perfectly silhouetted. She looked like a woman alone, vulnerable, unaware. The riders came into view. She counted them by moonlight. 17 men on horseback, more than expected. They were robed, faces covered, torches lit. the full theatrical performance of clan intimidation. They spread out as they approached, surrounding the cabin, cutting off escape routes. This was practiced coordination, men who'd done this before, confident in their superiority of numbers and surprise. Their leader, Mosley, she was certain, rode forward. "Eliza Freeman," he called. "Come out. We want to talk." She opened the door, stepped onto the porch, played terrified, voice shaking. "What do you want?" "I'm leaving tomorrow. The farm's for sale." "Too late for leaving," Mosley said. "We warned you. You should have run when you saw the cross." "I'm running now. Please, just let me go." "Can't do that. You're a symbol, Mrs. Freeman. Solomon's widow, uppity Union League supporter. People need to see what happens when freed people forget their place." He gestured, and two men dismounted, moved toward the porch. That was the signal. Rifle fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously. The 2 men on foot dropped, 1 clean headshot, 1 chest wound. The horses panicked, rearing and screaming. More shots from the tree line, aimed and precise. 3 more Klansmen fell from saddles. The rest scrambled for cover, returning fireblind, not knowing where the shots originated. Eliza dove back into the cabin, grabbed her rifle, took position at the window. She'd memorized every man's position, knew where they'd try to hide. She sighted on a figure crouched behind the well, squeezed the trigger, watched him crumple. Reloaded, found another target. The cabin filled with gun smoke, the smell of black powder, the sound of splintering wood where return fire hit walls. Outside, chaos. The Klansmen had expected defenseless victims. They'd found a prepared enemy with superior position and discipline. James and the veterans were directing fire, calling targets, maintaining a perimeter that kept the raiders pinned. Isaac moved between positions, supplying ammunition, pulling wounded defenders back to cover. The fight was loud, violent, and viciously one-sided. Virgil Hatcher, the man who'd carved the cross, tried to rally a charge. He made it 10 feet before 3 bullets took him down. Tobias Rains, who'd laughed about Clara, died crawling toward his horse, shot through the spine. The Klansmen who weren't dead were routing, abandoning their wounded, fleeing on foot when their horses bolted. The ones who ran made it maybe 50 yards before they hit the secondary ambush positions, where more defenders had waited for exactly this moment. The shooting lasted 12 minutes. Then silence, broken only by moaning from the wounded and the distant sound of frightened horses crashing through underbrush. Eliza stayed in position, scanning for movement, making sure the attack was finished. James called out, "Clear! Cease fire!" She stepped back onto the porch. The dooryard was a battlefield. Bodies lay crumpled, robes soaking up blood, torches scattered and dying. Her people emerged from cover, moving efficiently, checking the wounded, confirming kills. No mercy was shown. Every Klansman who still breathed was finished with a knife or bullet. This wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. No witnesses meant no testimony, no investigation that could be substantiated. They worked quickly. Bodies were loaded onto the Klansmen's own horses, hands and feet tied, faces still covered by hoods. The wounded who'd tried to flee in the secondary ambush were brought back to the farm. 17 men had come. 17 corpses would be disposed of. Benjamin had been right about the swamp. There were places in the Flint River bottomlands where water ran black and deep, where cypress roots hid everything that sank, where alligators and decay left no trace. By dawn, every body would be gone. While the men handled disposal, Eliza walked the property collecting spent cartridges, blood-soaked robes, anything that showed what had happened here. The robes would be burned, the cartridges buried. The blood would soak into Georgia clay and be explained, if anyone asked, as a butchered hog. The cabin had taken fire damage, holes in the walls, a shattered window, but nothing that couldn't be explained as decay or accident. She would repair it slowly over weeks, making the damage look old rather than fresh. At the other 5 target farms, similar scenes had played out. Smaller groups, fewer attackers, but the same result. Ambush, slaughter, disposal. By dawn on October 6th, the Terrell County clan had lost 17 men in coordinated raids, and the only people who knew were the ones who'd killed them. The swamp swallowed them. By first light on October 6th, every corpse was weighted with stones and sunk in channels too deep and tangled for recovery. Their horses were driven south, released in different counties where they'd be found and assumed to have wandered from somewhere else. Their robes and hoods were burned to ash. The ash scattered. The weapons they'd carried were cleaned and distributed among black families who'd never owned firearms before. A practical redistribution of resources. Eliza stood in her dooryard as the sun rose, looking at the place where 17 men had planned to terrorize a widow and found death instead. The cross was still there, pale against the red clay. She walked over, pulled it from the ground, and broke it across her knee. The wood splintered clean, releasing the smell of fresh pine. She fed the pieces to the fireplace, watched them burn to nothing. In Dawson, the disappearances began to register by mid-morning. Wives woke to find husbands gone. Sons didn't return from night errands. William Mosley's household waited through breakfast, through lunch, growing increasingly worried as their patriarch failed to appear. By afternoon, Sheriff Preston had been summoned to investigate reports of missing men. First 3, then 7. Then by evening, count 15 separate families claiming their men had vanished overnight. Preston organized search parties. They found nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood trails, no abandoned horses or dropped weapons. The hunting cabin showed evidence of recent occupation. Whiskey bottles, tobacco ash, but nothing indicating where the men had gone. The search expanded over the following days, covering roads and fields and river crossings. Still nothing. The men had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened and swallowed them. Rumors began within hours. Some said the missing men had fled debts or scandals, had run off to Texas or Alabama. Others claimed federal authorities had arrested them in secret, had spirited them away to face charges. A few suggested something darker, that the swamp had taken them, that they'd stumbled into something in the night, that whatever haunted the Flint River bottomlands had claimed them. No one publicly suggested the freed people had fought back. That possibility was too dangerous to voice, too threatening to the social order that depended on black submission. If freed people could organize, ambush, and kill white men with impunity, the entire structure of terror that enforced racial hierarchy collapsed. Better to believe in coincidence, bad luck, mysterious disappearance, anything except organized black resistance. But the black community knew. They didn't speak of it openly, didn't celebrate, but they knew. The women at the well whispered about how Virgil Hatcher's wife claimed her husband had gone to teach someone a lesson and never returned. The men at the cotton gin noted which white overseers suddenly seemed less aggressive, less confident, watchful where they'd been arrogant. Children noticed that parents seemed less afraid, held their heads higher, spoke more freely. Anna the seamstress, working above the general store, watched white customers come in with theories and speculation. Indians attacked them, one man suggested, or that gang of army deserters hiding in the swamp. Another, maybe they just decided to leave, go somewhere with better prospects. The theories multiplied, each one more elaborate, none approaching the truth. On October 10th, 5 days after the raid that never happened, a delegation from the Freedmen's Bureau arrived in Dawson to investigate the disappearances. 2 agents spent a week interviewing witnesses, examining the hunting cabin, organizing expanded searches. They found the same nothing Sheriff Preston had found. Their report, filed in November, concluded 17 white males, residents of Terrell County, Georgia, disappeared between the evening of October 5th and morning of October 6th, 1867. No evidence of foul play discovered. No bodies recovered. No credible witnesses to the individual's movements after 8 p.m. October 5th. Case remains open but inactive pending new evidence. The case would never be solved. Over the following months, theories hardened into accepted narrative. The missing men had been involved in some kind of illegal activity, robbery, smuggling, claim jumping, and had fled when their scheme collapsed. A few families held out hope, but most eventually held memorial services and moved on. The Terrell County clan, already weakened by the disappearances, dissolved entirely. No one wanted to join an organization where 17 members had vanished without explanation. The threat was too effective. Invisible enemies were more terrifying than visible ones. Eliza returned to farming. She repaired the cabin, planted winter wheat, visited church on Sundays. When people asked about the October 5th night, she said she'd slept through whatever commotion might have occurred. Heard horses, maybe, but stayed inside like any sensible woman would. Her performance of normalcy was so perfect that even the families who suspected the truth began to doubt their suspicions. Perhaps the widow really had been preparing to flee. Perhaps the missing men's raid had targeted somewhere else, or been called off, or never been planned at all. Memory became uncertain. Speculation replaced certainty, and the truth became one more story in a county full of stories nobody could prove. 2 weeks after the disappearances, on October 19, 1867, the Mosley hunting cabin caught fire. It burned completely, the old timber going up like tinder, collapsing into itself before anyone noticed the smoke. The volunteer fire brigade arrived too late to save anything, except a few charred timbers and ash. No one was injured. No cause was determined. Sheriff Preston noted it in his records as probable accident. Lamp left burning, dry wood, poor ventilation. The fire destroyed the clan's ledger, the membership rolls, the planning documents, the detailed history of raids and burnings and murders that might have been used as evidence if federal authorities had ever pressed for prosecution. Martha, who'd cleaned the cabin 2 weeks earlier and knew exactly where the ledger was kept, mentioned to a friend that it was fortunate no one had been inside when the fire started. Ruth, Mosley's former housemaid, she'd quit the week after the disappearances, citing family obligations, agreed it was indeed fortunate. With the ledger gone, any investigation into Klan activities lost its documentary foundation. Prosecutors might suspect, witnesses might testify, but without physical evidence, cases wouldn't proceed. The fire was perfectly timed, perfectly executed, and perfectly deniable. Just another accident in a county that seemed to be experiencing a run of bad luck. The burning didn't just destroy evidence, it destroyed certainty. White families who'd suspected Klan membership couldn't prove it now. The missing men might have been Klansmen, or they might have been victims of the Klan. or they might have been entirely uninvolved in racial violence. The ambiguity protected everyone and threatened everyone, making accusation and investigation equally difficult. Georgia in 1867 was a place where truth was whatever people decided to believe, and belief was shaped by who held power. For one brief moment, in one small county, that power had shifted. By November, federal troops completed their withdrawal from Middle Georgia. The Freedmen's Bureau closed its Terrell County office, citing reduced need and budget limitations. The infrastructure of Reconstruction, the schools, the legal support, the military oversight, evaporated as Northern commitment to racial equality met Southern resistance and Northern exhaustion. The freed people of Terrell County were left once again to protect themselves. But something had changed. In December, a new freedmen's school opened in Dawson, larger than the first, better secured, with volunteer guards provided by Union League members who no longer feared Klan reprisal. Classes filled within a week. Children who'd been kept home after Clara's death returned to education. Teachers from Atlanta and Savannah applied for positions, drawn by reports that Terrell County was safer than most, that something had broken the cycle of terror. Eliza attended the school's opening ceremony. She stood in the back, watching children recite the alphabet, listening to their voices rise in songs Clara had loved. No one thanked her publicly. No one acknowledged her role. But when the ceremony ended and families filed out into the December cold, several people met her eyes and nodded, a silent recognition that passed between people who shared a secret too dangerous to voice. The rumors began that winter and grew stronger with time. The widow Freeman knew things. She predicted when storms would hit, which crops would fail, which families would face trouble. She seemed to hear conversations that happened behind closed doors, to understand plans before they were announced. Some said she had second sight, a gift inherited from African ancestors. Others claimed she communed with spirits, that Solomon spoke to her from beyond the grave. A few suggested darker explanations, that she'd made deals with forces that lived in the swamp, that her knowledge came at a price better left unpaid. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. Eliza had maintained her intelligence network. The couriers and observers who'd fed her information during the war continued their work, watching, listening, reporting. When a white landowner planned to cheat a black sharecropper, Eliza knew before the contract was signed. When a merchant intended to use false weights, word reached her within hours. When anyone in Terrell County plotted harm against freed people, Eliza heard about it and found ways to intervene, sometimes with information shared at the right moment, sometimes with more direct action. She became a figure of legend, the widow who'd buried her husband and burned the men who killed him, the woman who'd survived the Klan and emerged stronger. Mothers invoked her name when children misbehaved. Be good, or the widow Freeman will know. Men reconsidered violence when they remembered that 17 Klansmen had vanished after targeting her farm. The legend grew beyond fact, became talisman and warning, a story that shaped behavior through the power of belief. In 1869, a carpetbagger from Massachusetts tried to swindle black farmers into selling their land for worthless promissory notes. He disappeared 3 days after arriving in Dawson. His horse was found wandering near the Flint River. His body never surfaced. No one asked Eliza if she knew what happened. No one wanted to know. In 1871, a group of night riders attempted to revive Klan activity, targeting a black family that had purchased property adjacent to a white-owned plantation. The riders were ambushed before they reached the property. 2 died, 3 fled the county, the rest abandoned the effort. Again, no investigation yielded results. Again, rumors pointed toward the haunted widow and her invisible army. The pattern held for years. Terrell County became, quietly and without official acknowledgement, one of the safest places for Black Georgians during the nadir of Reconstruction's collapse. While other counties saw lynchings, massacres, wholesale theft of land and voting rights, Terrell maintained an uneasy but functional peace. Not equality. White supremacy still structured society, still limited opportunity, still enforced segregation. But the most extreme violence was absent, deterred by a network that watched and responded, coordinated by a widow who remembered every lesson the war had taught. Eliza lived on the Freeman farm until 1893, when she died at 55 of pneumonia complicated by old injuries no one had known she carried. She was buried next to Solomon, the graves marked with matching limestone slabs. The funeral drew 200 people, Black families from across 3 counties, former soldiers and teachers and activists who'd known her during the war or worked with her after. White townspeople attended too, standing at the cemetery's edge, uncertain whether they were mourning a neighbor or afraid of what her death meant for the balance they'd learned to navigate. No one delivered a eulogy that mentioned intelligence work, ambushes, or 17 missing Klansmen. The Reverend spoke of faith and perseverance, of a woman who'd endured loss and built community, of a life lived in service to others. The omissions were themselves a kind of testimony, a recognition that some truths were safer kept silent even decades later. After the funeral, several people approached the grave separately when others weren't watching. Each left something: a folded note, a small stone, a sprig of pine. Messages in a language Eliza would have understood, coded acknowledgments from people whose lives she'd protected, whose secrets she'd kept, whose faith in justice she'd sustained when law and custom offered none. The Freeman farm changed hands 3 times in the 20th century before being subdivided and sold for residential development in 1978. The cabin was demolished, the fields paved, the root cellar filled and forgotten. Nothing remains now except street names that mean nothing to the families living there. Freeman Drive, Mockingbird Lane, a cul-de-sac called Solomon's Rest. But the story persists. In Terrell County's Black community, grandmothers still tell children about the widow who stopped the Klan, who made powerful men afraid, who proved that intelligence and courage could defeat superior numbers. The details vary. Some versions make Eliza a conjure woman, others a Union spy, others simply a farmer with a gift for knowing things. All versions agree on the core. She was dangerous because she understood that fear worked both ways, that terror could be turned back on those who wielded it, that the oppressed could become the hunters when the hunted learned to organize. Historical archives contain fragments: the Freedmen's Bureau report on disappearances, census records showing Eliza Freeman, widow, farm owner, a letter from a Union intelligence officer to his commander in 1865 mentioning the asset code-named Mockingbird, whose contributions to our understanding of Confederate logistics were invaluable. No connection between documents was ever officially made. The story remained scattered across files, lost in the noise of a chaotic era. In 1996, a graduate student researching Reconstruction violence in Georgia found a reference to the Terrell County Klan's collapse in 1867. She traced the timeline, interviewed descendants, examined what records survived. She submitted a paper to a historical journal, arguing that organized Black resistance had been more common and more effective than official histories acknowledged. that freed people had fought back strategically rather than submitting passively. The paper was rejected. Reviewers called it speculative, insufficiently evidenced, politically motivated. The student moved on to other topics. The story returned to silence. But some stories survive outside archives. They live in family memories, in songs whose meanings shift with the singers, in the way people navigate spaces shaped by histories they don't fully understand. Terrell County remained, throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, a place where racial violence was notably less prevalent than surrounding areas. No one could explain why. Some credited better law enforcement. Others pointed to economic factors or demographic changes. A few remembered, or had been told, about a widow who taught the county a lesson it never forgot. That some targets shoot back, that some victims become hunters, that the oppressed sometimes win when everyone expects them to lose. The 17 Klansmen who disappeared in October 1867 were never found, never explained, never properly mourned. Their names appear on no monument, their deaths in no official record. They became cautionary tales told in whispers, evidence that power has limits, that cruelty invites response, that people who believe themselves invincible often die surprised. And somewhere in the Flint River swamp, beneath black water and cypress roots, 17 sets of bones rest in mud that hold secrets the way stone holds weight. Silently, permanently, waiting for no one. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive.